Tonight's stories aren't about movie monsters. They're about toys that disappear from locked cabinets, doors that scream on their own, doubles of people who were never really there, and houses that remember you. Before we start, tell me in the comments, what scares you more? Haunted objects, haunted places, or people who suddenly aren't themselves? When I was 18, my life changed pretty suddenly. My mum caught me drinking, and instead of just grounding me or giving me a lecture, she kicked me out of the house. It felt harsh at the time, but I didn't really have many options, so I ended up moving in with my estranged father. We hadn't been close growing up, so just being under the same roof with him already felt a bit strange. He lived in this really old house on the coast of western Michigan. I'm talking about the kind of place that already feels like it has a history before you even step inside. The house was around 200 years old, and you could tell. The wood creaked, the layout was a bit odd, and there was always this quiet, heavy atmosphere that you couldn't quite explain. It wasn't necessarily scary at first, just different. The kitchen had a door that led down to the basement, and that's where my dad had his studio. He was a painter, and he spent most of his time down there working. It was almost like his own separate world. He would come up occasionally, grab something to eat, maybe say a few words, and then disappear back downstairs again. From the living room, you could see into the kitchen through this wide archway. Not the whole kitchen, but enough of it to notice if someone walked through or stood near the counters. I spent a lot of time on that couch, just reading or listening to the radio, trying to adjust to everything. One day, I was sitting there like usual, flipping through a book with the radio playing softly in the background. I wasn't really paying full attention until the DJ suddenly mentioned the date, July 2nd. That stuck with me because it was the day before my grandmother's birthday. It reminded me that we hadn't talked about any plans yet. Right after that, I looked up from my book toward the kitchen, and I saw my dad. He was standing there clear as day, I in the kitchen, but something about him immediately caught my attention. He wasn't dressed the way I'd been seeing him lately. Instead, he was wearing this old red and blue Detroit Pistons outfit, a hat, a windbreaker, and matching pants. It looked like something from years ago. I hadn't seen him wear that since I was much younger. For a second I just stared. It felt oddly specific, like I had stepped into a memory instead of the present. Still, I didn't think much of it at the time. I just assumed maybe he had kept the outfit somewhere and decided to wear it again. So I called out to him casually and asked if he had anything planned for my grandma's birthday the next day. The moment I spoke, he looked at me, and I'll never forget that look. It wasn't just surprise. It was like he had been caught off guard in a way that didn't make sense. His expression went completely still, almost stunned, like he wasn't expecting me to see him at all. Then, without saying a word, he stepped backward and disappeared. Not like someone turning and walking away, not like someone stepping behind a wall. He just moved back out of view in a way that didn't match the space he was in. It was quick, quiet, and wrong in a way that I couldn't immediately process. I remember sitting there for a second, confused more than anything. It was strange, sure, but my brain immediately tried to explain it. My dad smoked a lot of weed, and sometimes he acted weird or avoided conversations when he was too high. So I told myself that maybe he just didn't want to talk and slipped away quickly. I got up from the couch and walked into the kitchen to follow him. But when I got there, he wasn't there. The room was empty, completely still. I looked toward the basement door. It was shut. I tried the handle, locked, and I hadn't heard it open or close at all. In that house you could hear almost everything, especially doors. But there was no way he could have gone down there without making noise. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it, but eventually I just let it go. I told myself it was nothing, that I must have missed something. A few hours passed. Later that evening, I heard movement in the kitchen again. I walked in and saw my dad coming upstairs, getting ready to make himself something to eat. At that point, I was more annoyed than anything. I still felt like he had ignored me earlier, so I went straight up to him and called him out. I asked him why he didn't answer me when I talked to him earlier about Grandma's birthday. I told him it was rude and that it upset me, especially since it was about something important. He just stood there, looking at me like I had said something completely confusing. Then he told me he hadn't even been home. He said he had just gotten back a little while ago. Apparently, he had come in through the outside entrance that led directly to the basement. He had been carrying art supplies down there and had only just come upstairs to make dinner. At that point, I thought he was lying. I was ready to argue, to call him out, because I knew what I had seen. But then something else hit me. He wasn't wearing the same clothes, not even close. Now he had on a worn-out white t-shirt, black sweatpants, and a black baseball cap. Completely different from what I had seen earlier. It wasn't like he had quickly changed either. These clothes looked like what he had been wearing all day. I asked him why he had changed his outfit. He looked even more confused and told me he hadn't changed at all. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I described exactly what I had seen: the red and blue Pistons hat, the matching windbreaker, the pants. I was very specific about it because I remembered it clearly. He went quiet for a moment. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said he had thrown that outfit away about 10 years ago. It used to be his favorite, but it had gotten too worn out, so he got rid of it. The only thing he had kept was the hat, and even that was barely holding together. To prove it, he took me into his room and opened a drawer. Inside was the hat. It looked old, faded, and worn down, nothing like the version I had just seen him wearing earlier that day. He said he kept it around because he thought it was lucky, as especially when the Detroit Pistons were playing badly, I just stood there, staring at it, trying to connect everything, because that meant one thing. Whatever I had seen in the kitchen earlier wasn't him. It looked like him. It wore something he used to wear. It stood where he would normally stand, but it wasn't him. That moment stayed with me more than anything else that happened in that house, and there were a lot of strange things that happened there over time, things I still can't explain, but that one was different, because it didn't just feel like something unexplained. It felt like something had taken a very specific shape, one that it knew I would recognize, and for a brief moment I believed it was real. We were visiting my long-distance girlfriend's hometown, just trying to spend some quiet time together. It was late, and we didn't really want to go anywhere crowded, so we ended up parking in an empty lot at a nearby community college. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. The parking lot had a few different levels, and we had parked on one of the lower ones, kind of tucked away behind the buildings. From where we were, you couldn't really see any roads or passing cars. It felt isolated, like we were completely alone in that space. There was a single street light a short distance away, maybe 10 parking spots down. It gave off just enough light to see shapes and outlines, but everything still felt dim and shadowy. The kind of lighting where your eyes keep trying to adjust and your brain fills in the gaps. Still, it felt peaceful at first. We were just sitting there, talking about random things, enjoying each other's company. At some point, we leaned in to hug. It wasn't the most comfortable position since we were both sitting in the front seats, but we made it work. I turned toward her, facing her side of the car, and she turned toward me. My face was angled toward her window, and hers toward mine. It was one of those quiet, still moments where everything else fades out. I closed my eyes while we were hugging, and that's when something strange happened. Even with my eyes closed, I suddenly saw a shadow pass in front of me. It wasn't just a random flicker or a vague darkness. It was clear and distinct, like something had moved between my face and the streetlight outside. If you've ever closed your eyes and waved your hand in front of a light source, you can still see the shadow shift through your eyelids. That's exactly what it felt like. But this wasn't my hand, and it wasn't subtle. It felt like something or someone moved very close to the car, close enough that the shadow was strong and immediate. My mind instantly jumped to one thought: someone is right outside. I snapped my eyes open. There was nothing there. I immediately looked toward her side window, expecting to see someone standing there or moving away. But the space next to the car was empty. I checked the side mirror. Nothing. No movement, no figure, no reflection of anyone nearby. Then I looked out toward the rest of the parking lot, thinking maybe a car had passed by and the headlights caused it. But there were no cars, and no headlights, no movement anywhere. And the way the lot was positioned, there wasn't even a road in direct line of sight that could explain it. We were completely alone. We slowly pulled away from the hug, and for a couple of seconds I kept looking around, my heart starting to race. I had this strong, uneasy feeling that someone was right there, just out of view, like they were crouched below the window or hiding somewhere just outside the car. It didn't make sense, but the feeling was intense. Then I looked at her. She was already staring at me. There was something wrong with her expression. She looked frozen, like she had just seen something she couldn't process. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly lifted her hand to her neck, like she was checking something or reacting to a sensation. Without saying anything else, she started the car. Her movements were rushed and shaky, as then she hit the gas and started backing out fast, repeating the same thing over and over: "We have to go, we have to go, we have to go." At that point, I didn't question it. Whatever just happened, it clearly wasn't just in my head. As we reversed, a car suddenly turned into our level of the parking lot and started heading toward us. That alone shouldn't have been scary, but the timing made it feel worse, like we had waited just a little too long to leave. She was crying now, clearly shaken, gripping the wheel tightly as she drove us out of there. We didn't talk much until we had put some distance between us and that place. Later, when things calmed down a bit, she finally told me what she experienced. When we were hugging and she was looking at me, she said that for a moment my face wasn't my face anymore. She saw someone else, a completely different face, like a stranger was looking back at her instead of me. And at the same time, she had this overwhelming feeling that this person was about to hurt her. Specifically, she felt like it was going to grab her by the throat. That's why she instinctively touched her neck. That's why she panicked. That's why she needed to get out of there immediately. When she told me that, I felt a chill run through me, because at the exact same moment she was seeing that, I had my own experience. I told her about the shadow I saw while my eyes were closed, or how it felt like something moved right in front of my face, close enough to block the light. The timing matched perfectly. Neither of us had said anything in that moment, but we both experienced something at the exact same time. That's the part that still gets to me. If it had just been me, I would have brushed it off, told myself it was my imagination or some weird trick of the light. If it had just been her, maybe it was a brief hallucination or her mind playing tricks on her in the dark. But both of us at the same time. That's what I can't explain. I've never really believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I've always been the kind of person who looks for logical explanations first. And even now, I still try to think of one. Maybe there was some kind of light distortion, or maybe our brains just happened to misfire in the same moment. But deep down, it doesn't feel like that. She believes that whatever was there meant to harm her. I'm not sure I believe that. If anything, the way it happened makes me feel like it was a warning, like something was telling us that we shouldn't be there, that we needed to leave. And the fact that another car showed up right as we were leaving only adds to that strange feeling, like we had been sitting in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know what it was. I still don't. But out of everything I've experienced in my life, that's the one moment I can't explain away. And even now, thinking back on it, I can still feel that same uneasy tension, like something unseen was right there with us in that empty parking lot, just out of sight. Around the time Furby first became a big craze, there was another toy that caught everyone's attention, though its name has long since escaped me. It was a strange, egg-shaped creature, not quite cute, but certainly eye-catching. Its hair stuck out in every direction, wild and chaotic, like a little ball of static electricity. Its eyes weren't ordinary eyes. They were LED lights that spun and blinked in different patterns. At the back, it had a small plug shaped like a tail. Pull the tail, and the toy would shake, spin, and make a series of odd, almost comical noises. On paper, it was supposed to be a playful toy, one of those gadgets meant to delight kids with its quirks. But there was something about it that felt off, something subtle but hard to explain that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up if you looked at it too long in the dark. My cousins, naturally, were obsessed with it. They insisted it was haunted, or that it could move on its own and make sounds when no one was near it. They told all these stories about how it would stare at you with its glowing eyes and sometimes even roll or twitch when the lights were off. I didn't believe them at all. I thought they were just trying to scare me like kids always do, to see how far they could push each other's nerves. Still, a part of me was curious. One night, I decided to sleep over at my cousin's place just to see it for myself, and to test once and for all if there was anything to their stories. We set the toy on the bed before we started playing some card games, though I honestly don't even remember what we were doing at that moment. It didn't matter. We were laughing and joking, teasing the toy a little, pulling its tail and making it spin its LED eyes. For a while, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, without warning, it made a noise. Not the kind of noise it usually made when we pulled the tail, but a soft, almost purposeful sound. My first thought was that maybe it was a glitch, a mechanical hiccup. I bent over and looked at it. It was off, completely off. I set it back down, trying to ignore the feeling in my stomach that something was wrong, but then it happened again. The noise came, longer this time, almost like it was trying to get our attention. I froze. My heart started to race. This wasn't funny anymore. Panic hit me like a wave. Without thinking, I grabbed the toy and ran to the stairs, hurling it down to the floor below. It clattered loudly, and I jumped back, gasping for breath. My older cousin, who had always been the one trying to act brave, immediately started freaking out. He yelled at me, saying I had probably angered the spirit or whatever presence might have been inhabiting the toy. His face was pale, eyes wide, and there was that unmistakable tremor in his voice, the kind that comes from someone on the verge of tears but trying desperately to stay in control. The rest of us, younger cousins and I, were trembling too. We didn't know what to do. We all felt it, that heavy, oppressive sense that something unseen was present in the room. We were scared beyond reason, and none of us wanted to be anywhere near the toy. Then someone, I don't remember which cousin, had the idea of using the fine china cabinet. There was an empty section, dark and untouched, and we decided it would be the perfect place to hide the toy. Working together, we shoved it inside, or closed the door with a soft but definite thud, and for a moment the house felt quieter. But we weren't done. We wanted to make sure nothing else could happen. Looking around, we grabbed what we could find nearby. There were dried corn leaves from decorations that lined the dining room table, and on a whim, or maybe instinctively, we twisted them into a cross and placed it in front of the cabinet door. It was ridiculous, a childish gesture, but it gave us a sense of control, a sense that we were protecting ourselves from whatever this strange force might be. For the first time that night, we managed to calm ourselves, even if only slightly. We went back upstairs, heart still pounding, and tried to sleep. The night stretched on slowly. Every small creak of the floor, every distant sound of the wind outside, every hum from the refrigerator made me flinch. I kept imagining the toy moving in the dark, those spinning LED eyes glowing just at the edge of my vision. Or eventually exhaustion won, and we drifted into an uneasy sleep, a light, anxious doze filled with vivid, half-remembered dreams of blinking lights and strange noises. The next morning, we gathered enough courage to check on the toy. I expected it to be sitting there, maybe a little dusty from the cabinet, harmless again in the light of day. But when we opened the cabinet door, we were met with something far stranger than we could have imagined. The toy was gone, completely gone, and the cross we had made from corn leaves, it had been ripped in half, the pieces lying on the floor in front of the empty cabinet. My cousins and I weren't religious. None of us would have dared destroy or desecrate a religious item for a prank, and the looks on their faces told me that they hadn't. We were all wide-eyed and silent, unsure whether to scream, cry, or simply run. We asked our parents, hoping maybe they had moved it, put it away without telling us. But they had no idea what we were talking about. None of them even remembered seeing the toy. It was as if it had vanished completely from the world, leaving only the ripped cross behind as a silent reminder that something strange had happened. Years have passed since that night. I don't know how long exactly, maybe 10 years now, but I still have no explanation for what we experienced. That toy, with its wild hair, spinning eyes, and mysterious noises, wasn't just a broken gadget. Something about it felt alive, aware, and entirely beyond our understanding. Even now, I can picture it clearly in my mind. The shape, the glowing, spinning eyes, the twitching little body, the tail plug dangling uselessly. I remember the fear, the cold dread that seemed to settle in the room the moment it made a noise without reason. And I remember the way my cousins looked at each other in that terrifying silence, eyes wide, knowing something had happened that none of us could explain or rationalize. That night left a mark on me, one that has stayed with me all these years. It's the kind of story that makes you second-guess ordinary objects, wonder if some things are meant to be left untouched, and realize that sometimes even toys can hold something far stranger than their intended design. No one in my family ever saw that toy again. None of my cousins ever spoke about it beyond that night, as if acknowledging it again might bring it back. And every time I think about that strange, blinking little creature, I feel the same mix of awe and terror that I did as a child, lying awake in my cousin's room, convinced that whatever had inhabited that toy was still out there somewhere, watching, waiting, and remembering. When I was younger, we had a dog that was a little too wild to be trusted inside the house. He wasn't aggressive, just full of energy and impossible to control. So during the summer, he stayed outside on a long lead. His spot was up the hill in our backyard, near a thick cluster of forsythia bushes that grew wide and tall, almost like a natural wall of branches and leaves. It was a quiet area, a little separated from the house, and it always felt just a bit more isolated than the rest of the yard. Taking care of the dog was a shared responsibility between me and my brother. Every day, one of us handled the food, and the other handled the water. Somehow, over time, this simple chore turned into a competition. It became a race. Whoever finished their part first would bolt back down to the house, and we'd both sprint like maniacs down the hill, pushing, shoving, laughing, and trying to beat each other to the steps. It probably wasn't the safest thing we could have been doing, especially with the slope and the uneven ground, but somehow we never seriously hurt ourselves. It was just part of our routine. On the day this happened, it was my turn to take care of the water. I remember filling up a large jug at the sink, gripping it with both hands as I headed out the back door. The air was warm, and the kind of quiet summer day where everything feels still, except for the occasional sound of insects or distant movement. I walked up the steps and started making my way up the hill toward the dog spot. The climb wasn't too bad, but carrying the water made it slower. By the time I reached him, he was already excited, wagging his tail and pacing in a small circle as he saw me coming. I emptied out the old, slightly dirty water from his bowl and started pouring in the fresh water from the jug. As I did, I happened to glance down toward the house. That's when I saw my brother. He was about halfway up the yard, carrying the dog's food like he always did. I remember immediately smiling because I knew what that meant. I was clearly going to win the race that day. I called out to him, teasing him, saying there was no way he'd beat me since I was already almost done. It felt like a guaranteed victory, and I was already looking forward to the sprint back down. He didn't say much. He just kind of shrugged and kept walking up the hill. That wasn't too unusual. Sometimes he didn't bother responding, especially if he knew he was already losing. But then something strange happened. Instead of coming straight toward me and the dog like he normally would, he veered slightly to the side and walked around the far end of the forsythia bushes. It caught my attention immediately because there was no reason to go that way. The bushes were thick, and there wasn't a clear path through them. If you wanted to get to the dog, you came straight up the open part of the yard. I remember thinking it was a little odd, but not enough to worry about. Maybe he was trying to surprise me or come around from the other side for some reason. Kids do random things, so I didn't question it too much. I figured I'd just wait a second, let him come around, dump the food, and then we'd both take off running like usual. I finished pouring the water and set the jug down. The dog was happy, wagging his tail, so I spent a few seconds scratching behind his ears. Then I leaned in a bit more, giving him a proper pet, enjoying the moment while I waited for my brother to appear from the other side of the bushes. But he didn't come. At first I thought maybe he was just taking his time. I waited a little longer, looking toward the side where I had seen him disappear. Still nothing. The bushes rustled slightly in the breeze, but there was no sign of him. That's when it started to feel off. I walked around the bushes to the spot where I thought he should be. There was no one there. No movement, no sound, nothing. The ground was empty. There wasn't even any indication that someone had just walked through that area. I remember feeling confused more than anything else. I looked back down the hill, thinking maybe he had somehow turned around and gone back toward the house without me noticing. But that didn't make sense. I had been right there the whole time. There was no way he could have passed me without me seeing him. I checked around the bushes again, even looking into the thicker parts just in case he was hiding or messing with me. But there was nothing. He wasn't there. After standing there for a bit longer, waiting and trying to make sense of it, I eventually gave up. The excitement of the race was gone, replaced by this strange, uneasy feeling that I couldn't quite explain. I picked up the empty jug and slowly walked back down the hill toward the house. When I got inside, I walked into the kitchen, and there he was. My brother was standing there, completely calm, talking to my mum like nothing unusual had happened. I just stared at him for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. "How did you get back down here?" I asked. He looked at me, confused. "Or what? Didn't you just go up to feed the dog?" He shook his head. "No, I've been here talking to Mom." I remember the exact feeling in that moment. It wasn't immediate fear. It was more like everything in my mind paused, trying to fit two completely different realities together. I had just seen him outside, not imagined it, not thought I saw him. I had clearly watched him walking up the hill, carrying the food, reacting to me, and then disappearing behind the bushes. And yet, here he was, saying he had never left the kitchen. I didn't know what to say after that. I just brushed it off with something like, "Oh, okay," and didn't push it any further. But the feeling stayed with me. To this day, I can still picture it clearly. The way he walked, the way he reacted, the exact moment he turned and went behind the bushes. It all felt completely real, completely normal, until it suddenly wasn't. Nothing bad happened. There was no sound, no voice, no direct interaction beyond that brief moment. But that somehow makes it even stranger. It was just him, or at least something that looked exactly like him. I've never been able to explain it. Maybe it was some kind of trick of the mind. Maybe my brain filled in details that weren't really there, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And the part that has always stuck with me the most is this. If I hadn't gone back inside and asked him that question, I would have believed without a doubt that my brother had been there the whole time. When I was in high school, I signed up for a charity event that took place in an old mansion near our town. It wasn't a huge estate, but it had that same grand, old-world feeling, like something frozen in time. The place had tall windows, heavy wooden doors, long hallways that seemed to stretch farther than they should, and rooms filled with antique furniture that looked like it hadn't been moved in decades. The idea behind the event was simple, but interesting. Visitors would come through the house and we would act out short, scripted scenes in different rooms. Each of us had a role, and we were dressed in clothes that matched the time period of the people who used to live there. It was like stepping into the past and pretending, for a few hours, that we belonged to another era. Earlier that week, before the actual event, I had gone to the mansion to help set everything up. We spent hours moving furniture slightly, placing decorations on and trying to make each room look as authentic as possible. The house itself already had a strong presence, so it didn't take much to make it feel alive again. While we were working, I got curious. Old houses always come with stories, and this one felt like it had more than most. There was just something about the atmosphere, quiet but not empty, like the house was aware of us. At one point I found myself talking to one of the women who helped take care of the mansion. She'd been working there for years and seemed to know everything about the place. So I asked her, half joking but also half serious, if the house was haunted. She didn't laugh it off like I expected. Instead, she calmly said, "We do have ghosts here, but they're nice." The way she said it made it sound completely normal, like she was talking about regular visitors. I remember pausing for a second, not sure if she was joking, but her expression didn't change. She continued, explaining that sometimes, if they rearranged things in a room in a way the spirits didn't like, those changes wouldn't last. She told me that they would come back the next day and find everything moved back to how it used to be. Then she added something that stuck with me. "There are times when we change the comforters on the bed," she said, "and when we come back a few days later, there's an indentation, like someone has been sitting on the edge of the bed. But no one has access to the house." That part gave me chills. The house wasn't open to the public all the time, and it was kept locked. There was no simple explanation for something like that. Still, I didn't want to overthink it. I just nodded, smiled, and went back to helping with the setup. But the idea stayed in my mind. By the time the event night came around, the mansion looked incredible. Every room felt like a scene from the past. The lighting was dim but warm. The decorations were in place, and everyone was dressed in costumes that made it easy to forget what year it actually was. I was assigned to one of the rooms with my brother and another person who was helping out. The room itself was large, but felt strangely closed in. It had an old bed against one wall, a few chairs, and a tall wooden armoire in the corner. The kind that looks heavy enough that it hasn't been moved in 100 years. Before the visitors started coming through, we had some time to just stand around and wait. That's when I remembered the conversation from earlier in the week. I decided to bring it up. Trying to sound casual, I asked out loud, "So, are there any ghosts in this room?" I wasn't really expecting anything to happen. It was more of a joke than anything else. For a moment, nothing changed. The room stayed quiet. No movement, no sounds. Just the three of us standing there. I even looked around, half expecting something small, maybe a creak, maybe a flicker of light, but there was nothing. Then I turned to look at my brother, and that's when I saw his face. He had gone completely pale. Not just surprised, he looked genuinely terrified. Before I could even ask him what was wrong, the other person in the room slowly raised their hand and pointed behind me. I felt that instant drop in my stomach, that feeling when you know something isn't right even before you see it. Slowly, I turned around. Behind me was the armoire, and right as I looked at it, the doors swung open, not slowly, not gently. They flew open with force, like someone had yanked them from the inside. The sound echoed in the room, loud, sharp, and completely out of place in the quiet space we had been standing in just seconds before. I froze. For a moment, none of us said anything. We just stared at the open doors. Then my brain kicked in, trying to find a logical explanation. I remembered that the handle on the armoire had been removed. Because of that, the doors couldn't be properly closed. Instead, someone had shoved a piece of paper between the doors to keep them shut. So I told myself that maybe the paper had slipped out, maybe it had just fallen, and the doors had opened because of that. It made sense. At least it sounded like it made sense. So we decided to test it. We walked over to the armoire, still a bit shaken, and put the piece of paper back between the doors exactly the way it had been before. Then we stepped back, and we tried to make it happen again. We pushed slightly, adjusted the paper, tried different angles, anything that might recreate what we had just seen. But no matter what we did, the doors wouldn't move, not even a little. They stayed completely shut. There was no way to make them swing open on their own, and definitely no way to make them fly open like they had just moments earlier. That's when the room started to feel different, heavier. The air felt still, but not in a normal way. It was like something had shifted, and we were suddenly very aware that we weren't alone in the way we thought we were. No one said it out loud, but we all felt it. The rest of the night went on, and we did what we were supposed to do. We acted our parts, greeted visitors, and stayed in character. But that moment never left my mind. Every time I glanced at the armoire, I felt uneasy. It never moved again after that. Not while we were there. But that didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. Because whatever had happened, it had happened once. And that was enough. Even now, when I think back on that night, I still try to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe there was some kind of pressure in the wood. Maybe the paper slipped in a way we couldn't recreate. But deep down, none of those explanations really feel right. What sticks with me the most isn't just the doors opening. It's the timing. I had just asked, out loud, if there were any ghosts in the room, and seconds later, something answered. When I was 6 years old, my father was stationed with the United States Air Force at Upper Heyford in the UK. We lived in a small village in Warwickshire, in a house that was more than 150 years old. The wooden floors were uneven, old, and groaned under every step. You could hear every creak and shift as if the house itself was alive, remembering every footfall from the past. To a child, the house was full of character during the day, but at night, the creaking and the shadows made it feel almost like it had a mind of its own. One afternoon I had a friend over, and we decided to go upstairs to my room to play. My room was the first one along a hallway at the top of the stairs. The rest of the hallway led to rooms used for storage, and at the very end there was a stairway that climbed up to the attic. The hallway was long and narrow, and the old floors caused every toy car or action figure to move unpredictably. We started with our Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars, taking turns rolling them down the hall toward the attic stairs. Because the floor was uneven, most of the cars would only travel about 3/4 of the way before wobbling to a stop. We laughed, chasing after each car and running back into my room to grab more toys to roll. Every now and then, a car would slip further than expected, and it was always thrilling to see how far it could go on that old, creaky floor. While searching for more toys one time, we found a small toy motorcycle about the size of an adult's hand. It had squared-edged tires, which meant it could stand upright on its own. Curious, we decided to see how far it could roll down the hallway. We set it down near my room and gave it a gentle push. To our surprise, the motorcycle rolled all the way down the hallway, continuing past where most of the cars had stopped, and finally toppled over onto its side near the attic stairs. Excited, We ran back into my room to look for more toys. When we returned to the hallway, I noticed something that froze me in place. The toy motorcycle was standing upright, facing toward my room, the exact opposite direction from which it had fallen. I stared at it, my heart beginning to beat faster, and asked my friend if he had seen it fall. He confirmed that he had seen it fall toward the attic stairs and that he had been with me the whole time. He had not touched it, neither had I since we were busy looking for more cars. Confused, I called out for my mum to see if she had come upstairs. She responded from downstairs. My father was still at the Air Force Base, and the dog was downstairs with my mum. If anyone had come up the stairs, we would have heard the creaking and groaning of the old wooden floors, the same way we heard every other step we took. If the dog had come up, we would have heard its nails clicking against the wooden planks. There was no explanation, no sound, no clue, nothing to suggest that the motorcycle had been moved. We both stood there, staring at the toy, too stunned to speak. I remember thinking over and over, how had it moved? How had it flipped itself around? There was no logical way it could have ended up in that position on its own. No wind, no vibration, nothing that could explain the reversal. My young mind couldn't process what had happened, and even now, more than 40 years later, I still have no answer. The house itself had a strange energy. It was old enough that it felt like it carried memories of all the people who had lived there before us. The floors were uneven, the doors were old, and sometimes at night the stairs would groan even when no one was walking on them. I can't explain why this toy moved, but the memory of that small motorcycle standing upright in a silent hallway facing toward my room has stayed with me my entire life. Even now, I can remember the sight of it perfectly. The tiny, hand-sized motorcycle, so delicate yet somehow purposeful in its movement, standing there as if someone had placed it deliberately, facing me across the long, empty hall. The impossibility of the moment. It had to have been moved by something unseen. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a trick of the floor. Maybe my memory of where it fell was wrong. Maybe some tiny vibration or draft caused it to shift. But every time I go over it in my head, none of it makes sense. The precision, the reversal, the silence, it defies logic. That hallway became a place I remembered with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. I would sometimes walk past it at night and imagine the toy standing there again, perfectly upright, watching me as I passed. The house felt alive in ways I couldn't explain, full of hidden moments that no one else would ever see or understand. Even as an adult, when I think back to that day, I feel the same quiet shock and wonder. The memory has stayed vivid for decades because it was so inexplicable. A simple toy, an ordinary hallway, a silent moment in an old house, and yet it remains one of the most mysterious experiences of my life. That motorcycle, standing upright, reversed, with no sound, no human hand involved. It is a memory that has never left me. Sometimes I wonder if it was a one-time thing, if it was the house itself, or something else entirely. I will never know, and maybe that's the part that makes it unforgettable. Some things in life happen, and no matter how much you analyze them, they simply refuse to be explained. And that toy in that old Warwickshire house remains one of those unexplainable, haunting moments that stays with you forever. When I was 16, back in 2005, I used to spend a lot of time at my friend Joe's house. He lived out in the countryside in Hampshire, England, the kind of place where everything felt quiet and spread out, with long stretches of land and very few people around. His house itself was large and a bit old, surrounded by fields and trees, and not too far from it there was an abandoned vineyard that had been left untouched for years. From what I remember, it had already been unused for over a decade by that point. The vineyard stretched across acres of land, rows of old vines growing wild and uneven, no longer maintained. At the top of a hill overlooking it, there was an old restaurant, and next to it sat a caravan that the owner had once lived in. Even from a distance, the place had a strange feeling to it. It didn't look completely destroyed or decayed, just left behind, as if someone had walked away one day and never come back. One afternoon in the middle of summer, Joe and I decided to walk his dogs through the vineyard. It was warm, the kind of quiet day where you could hear insects in the grass and feel the stillness of the countryside. As we walked, we both kept glancing up toward the hill where the restaurant stood. Eventually, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to go up and take a closer look. The walk up the hill felt longer than it looked from below. The ground was uneven, and the vines were overgrown, brushing against our legs as we made our way through. When we finally reached the top, the restaurant stood there in silence, looking almost untouched by time. All the doors and windows were shut tight. None of the glass was broken, which was surprising considering how long it had been abandoned. We walked around the building, trying a few doors, but none of them would open. At the back we found a door that looked like it might give way, but it was stuck fast. Neither of us really wanted to force it open, so instead we peered through one of the windows. Inside, the chairs were all stacked upside down on the tables, just like they had been left at closing time years ago. The bar still looked stocked, bottles lined up neatly behind it, though everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. The whole place felt sealed, frozen in time. After a while, we lost interest in the restaurant and walked over to the caravan, hoping it might be more interesting. Well, right away, it was clear that it had not held up as well. One of the doors was hanging open, and the other had a smashed panel near the bottom. Leaves had blown inside, and brambles had crept through the doorway, making it look neglected and half reclaimed by nature. We stepped inside carefully. The air felt different in there, heavier somehow. There were still things left behind, old VHS tapes about marketing, random papers scattered around, and some handwritten poetry taped to the wall. The poems were a bit depressing, like someone had been going through a rough time when they wrote them. It gave the place a slightly uncomfortable feeling, like you were standing in someone else's abandoned thoughts. As we moved further inside, one of Joe's dogs wandered toward the bedroom area at the back of the caravan. Suddenly, it started snarling. Not a playful growl, but a deep, serious warning. The other dog immediately rushed over and stood beside it, letting out this strange barking whine. Both of them were focused on the same spot inside the bedroom. Joe and I froze. Neither of us said a word. The shift in the dog's behavior was instant and intense, and it made the air feel thick with tension. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The dogs stopped making noise completely. The silence that followed was worse than the growling. It felt wrong, like something had just changed. At the exact same moment, both dogs bolted. They ran out of the caravan as fast as they could, one of them almost getting stuck, trying to squeeze through the broken panel. That was enough for us. We didn't wait to see anything else. We rushed out right behind them, hearts pounding, adrenaline kicking in without us even thinking about it. We stopped a few meters away from the caravan, trying to catch our breath. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The dogs stayed close together, both staring back toward the caravan, but refusing to go any closer. Their ears were up, bodies tense, like they were still aware of something we couldn't see. After a while, Joe said, "Maybe we should check again, just to be sure." Against my better judgment, I followed him as we slowly made our way around to the back of the caravan. We looked through the bedroom window, the same place where the dogs had reacted. There was nothing there. The room was completely empty. An open wardrobe stood against the wall, and a few leaves were scattered across the floor. That was it. No movement, no sound, nothing out of place. But even with nothing there, I felt this strong chill run through me. It didn't feel right. It felt like something had been there, even if we couldn't see it anymore. I didn't want to stay any longer. Without saying much, I turned and started walking quickly back down the vineyard. Joe followed behind me, picking up his pace to keep up. The dogs stayed ahead of us, almost like they were leading the way out. When we had gone a fair distance, about 50 or 60 meters away, we both stopped. Something made us look back. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was that uneasy feeling that hadn't gone away. As we turned around, I saw it. In the window of the restaurant, at the top of the hill, there was a figure. It was dark, just standing there, looking out in our direction. It wasn't moving, just watching. From that distance, I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person standing still in a place we knew had been locked up tight. That was it for me. I turned and ran. The dogs ran with me, and I could hear Joe right behind me. The walk back suddenly felt much longer than before, every step filled with that same uneasy feeling pressing down on me. As we got closer to the gate leading out of the vineyard, Joe shouted for me to wait. I slowed down slightly, turning my head just enough to hear him. That's when he said, in a shaky voice, "Did you see that guy in the window?" I didn't answer. I just sped up again and kept running all the way back to his house. Even now, I still think about that day. The empty caravan, the way the dogs reacted, the silence that followed, and that figure standing in the restaurant window. There was no clear explanation for any of it. The building had been sealed, the place abandoned for years, and yet something, or someone, had been there, watching us as we left. If you're still listening, you've heard toys move on their own, animals react to something you can't see, and figures watching from windows that should be empty. Which story so far feels the most believable to you? And which one do you pray never happens in your own home? Drop your answer while we continue. When I was around 11 years old, I used to spend my weekends with my dad. He lived in upstate New York, not far from a large lake. The area was beautiful in a quiet, wild kind of way. His house sat along a narrow road that curved through a rocky, wooded mountainside. There were scattered homes here and there, but most of the land around us felt untouched. Trees grew thick, the ground was uneven, and there were small caves and dips in the earth that always made the place feel a little mysterious, especially as a kid. We had 3 cats back then, and they weren't typical indoor pets. They lived outside most of the time. My dad had built them a small shelter, and they were free to roam wherever they wanted. It wasn't unusual for them to disappear for hours, sometimes even a full day, hunting or exploring the woods. Back then, It felt normal. It was just part of living in a place like that. One of the things my dad and I did the most was go fishing. It became our routine whenever I visited. To get to the lake, we had to walk down a short trail that cut through the woods. The path itself wasn't long, maybe a few minutes at most, but there was one part of it that always made me uneasy. About halfway down the trail, we had to pass an old house. It stood off to the side, slightly hidden behind overgrown weeds and tangled plants. The entire place was boarded up, every window, every door sealed shut with weathered wood that looked like it had been there for years. The paint on the house had faded and peeled, and parts of it looked like they were slowly falling apart. No one lived there. There were no signs, no indication that anyone was planning to fix it up or sell it. It just sat there, abandoned and forgotten. But what bothered me wasn't just how it looked. It was the feeling. Every time we walked past that house, I felt like something was wrong. It's hard to explain, especially now. But even as a kid, I could feel it clearly. It was like being watched, not in a playful or imagined way, but in a heavy, uncomfortable way that made my stomach tighten. I would try not to look at the house when we passed it, but it was almost impossible. Something about it pulled your attention, like it wanted to be noticed. I never liked being near it, not even for a second. The strange part was that our fishing spot was right behind that house. Once we got past it, the trail opened up to the edge of the lake, and there was a small clearing that felt perfect for fishing. My dad loved that spot. It was quiet, peaceful, and the fish were good there. So every time I pushed down that uneasy feeling and focused on being there with him. For a while, everything stayed normal. Then, during the fall, something changed. I remember getting a call from my dad one day. His voice sounded different, quieter than usual. And he told me that one of our cats was missing. At first, I didn't think much of it. Like I said, they wandered all the time. I figured she had just gone off somewhere and would come back soon, but she didn't. A few days passed, then a week. Still nothing. I started to feel uneasy, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Cats disappear sometimes, especially in areas like that. Maybe she had found a new place to explore, or maybe something else had happened that we just couldn't know. Then, about a month later, my dad called again. Another cat was gone. This time, it felt different. Even as a kid, I could hear it in his voice. There was something heavier behind his words, something he wasn't saying out loud. I didn't fully understand it back then, but I could feel that something wasn't right. Still, I tried to make sense of it in a simple way. I told myself it was just bad luck. Maybe predators, maybe the woods, maybe just one of those things you couldn't control. But deep down, there was this quiet feeling that it wasn't random. Years passed before I learned the truth. We were sitting together one night, much older by then, out on a camping trip. There was a fire going, and the kind of silence that only comes when you're far away from everything else. Somehow the topic came up again. I mentioned the cats, half expecting him to brush it off the way he used to. But he didn't. He got quiet for a moment, then told me what really happened. After the first cat went missing, he had gone down to the lake to look for her. He said he followed the same path we always used, past that abandoned house, down to our usual fishing spot, and that's where he found her. She was lying on the ground near the edge of the lake, right behind that house. At first he thought maybe she had been attacked, but when he got closer, something didn't make sense. There were no visible injuries, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Her body was completely untouched, but her eyes were wide open. He said it looked like she had died suddenly, like something had scared her so badly that her body just gave out. He didn't know how to explain it, so he didn't tell me. He thought it would be too much for me to handle at that age. When the second cat went missing, he already had a feeling. He told me he felt it before he even went looking, that same sense of dread, the same heavy feeling we both got whenever we walked past that house. Still, he went down to the lake, and he found the second one in the exact same place, same position, same condition, no injuries, eyes open, just lying there, a few feet from where the first one had been. Hearing that, even years later, sent a chill through me. It wasn't just that the cats had died, it was how it happened. The same spot, the same strange condition. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt deliberate. My dad told me he buried them in the backyard after that. He didn't want to leave them there, and he didn't want me to ever see them like that. Then he said something that stuck with me. He admitted that he had always felt the same thing I did about that house. Every time we walked past it, he felt it too. That sense that something wasn't right, that something about the place was wrong in a way you couldn't explain with logic. He believed that whatever was responsible for what happened to the cats was connected to that place, not just the house, but the land itself. He said it felt like a warning, like something was trying to send a message. Not long after those incidents, we moved away from that area. We never went back to that house, never walked that trail again, and never fished at that spot by the lake. Even now, thinking about it years later, I still can't explain what happened. Maybe there's a logical answer, something simple that we just never figured out. But it never felt simple. It felt like something was there, and whatever it was, it didn't want us around. I was about 10 years old when this happened, and at the time my family was living in Germany. The apartment we had wasn't small or simple. It was part of a large complex, but our unit itself felt big in a strange way. The main entrance opened into a hallway on the ground floor, and from there a spiral staircase led down to a lower level where the bedrooms were. My brother and I both had our rooms downstairs, along with a bathroom. During the day it felt normal, but at night it always had this heavy, quiet feeling that made everything seem darker than it should have been. One afternoon after school, when I was in 5th grade, I came home like I always did. It was nothing special, just a regular day. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. The second I walked into the hallway, something felt off. It wasn't something I could explain at the time, just a sudden shift in the atmosphere that made me uneasy. Then everything started happening at once. Every door that I could see in the hallway began opening and closing by itself. Not slowly, not gently, but moving back and forth like someone was pushing them hard from the other side. The sound echoed through the apartment, doors slamming, hinges creaking, wood hitting wood over and over again. It was chaotic, like the whole place had suddenly come alive. And then I heard it. From downstairs, from the area where the spiral staircase led, there was this high-pitched scream. It didn't sound like a normal person yelling. It was sharper, more drawn out, almost unnatural. The kind of sound that doesn't just scare you, it freezes you for a second because your brain can't even process what you're hearing. I didn't wait to figure anything out. I turned around and ran straight out of the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't even bother closing the door behind me. I just needed to get away from whatever was happening inside. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I remember just standing outside, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what I had just seen. I stayed outside and waited for my brother to come home from school. He was 4 years older than me, in 9th grade, and I figured if anyone could handle it, it would be him. When I finally saw him walking up with one of his friends, I ran over and told them everything, probably talking too fast and not making much sense. Well, they didn't really believe me at first, but they were curious enough to check. The two of them went inside while I stayed outside. For a few seconds, everything was quiet. Then suddenly, I saw both of them come running back out of the apartment. Not walking fast, not joking around, but actually running. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. They had seen it too. They didn't say much at first, just that they weren't going back in there. Instead, they decided they were going to leave and go hang out at a teen center for a while. I wanted to go with them, but I was too young, and they weren't about to babysit me after what just happened. So I stayed. I stood outside for a while, waiting for my dad to come home from work, but he wasn't due back for another couple of hours. At some point, I got tired of just standing there. Part of me thought maybe whatever happened had stopped, or maybe I just didn't want to feel helpless anymore. So I went back inside. This time, everything was completely normal. The doors were still. The hallway was quiet. There was no screaming, no movement, nothing out of place. It was like nothing had ever happened. That almost made it worse in a way, because it made me question what I had just experienced. I didn't go downstairs. I stayed in the living room, sitting in the corner with the TV on, watching cartoons, but not really paying attention. My eyes kept drifting back to the hallway, just waiting for something to happen again. Every small sound made me tense up. I stayed like that for about an hour until my dad finally came home. When we told him what happened, he didn't really take it seriously. He brushed it off like kids imagining things, or maybe some kind of draft causing the doors to move. Nothing really came of it, and life just kind of went on. But that wasn't the end of it. Later that same year, something else happened that I still remember clearly. I was asleep in my room downstairs when I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know why I woke up, but then I heard it. There was a sound coming from my toy box, like someone was digging through it. Not just a small noise, but the clear sound of things being moved around, like someone was searching for something. I stayed completely still, trying to listen. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I started to see something. There was a shape near my toy box. At first, it was just a faint outline, like a darker patch in the darkness. But slowly, it became clearer. It looked like the outline of a small boy, moving slowly, shifting through my things like he was looking for something specific. I couldn't see details like a face, but the shape was there. Solid enough that I knew I wasn't just imagining random shadows. I was completely frozen. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but it felt like forever. My whole body felt locked in place. Like I couldn't move even if I wanted to. I just watched, barely breathing, hoping it would stop. After what felt like 10 minutes, something in me finally snapped. I jumped out of bed, ran to the light switch, turned it on, and then jumped back into bed as fast as I could. The room was empty. The toy box was still. Nothing was there, but I didn't feel safe. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lying in bed and staring at that toy box, too scared to even blink for too long. I waited until I could hear people waking up in the house before I felt any sense of relief. After that night, I refused to sleep downstairs. Eventually, my dad gave in and moved me to one of the upstairs bedrooms. I didn't care about the space or anything else. I just wanted to be away from that lower level. Over the years we lived there, I wasn't the only one who experienced things. My brother had his own moments. things he didn't always talk about right away. My dad, who didn't believe us at first, eventually admitted that he had seen things too. One time, when my brother and I were away visiting our mum, he said he saw a dark figure of a man walking down the hallway. He also mentioned finding doors open downstairs that he was sure he had closed. What made it even harder to ignore was that it wasn't just us. Friends who stayed over, even people who visited multiple times, started mentioning seeing the same kind of figure. A dark man in the house, usually in the hallway or near the stairs. Not everyone saw it, but enough people did that it couldn't just be brushed off as one person's imagination. Looking back now, I still don't know what to make of it. Maybe there were explanations for some of it. Old buildings make noise, light plays tricks on your eyes, and fear can make things feel more real than they are. But that first day, with the doors slamming and that scream echoing from downstairs, and later seeing that figure by my toy box, those moments never felt like imagination. Even now, after all these years, I can still picture that apartment clearly. The hallway, the spiral staircase, the quiet downstairs rooms, and that feeling that something else was there, sharing the space with us. I don't know what it was, but I know we weren't the only ones who felt it. When I was about 8 years old, my family moved into a new house. It wasn't huge, but the layout always stood out to me. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs, and for some reason, I ended up getting the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. At that age, it felt like a big deal. The room was much larger than any room I'd had before, and at first I loved it just because of that. It made me feel grown up, like I had my own space. But that feeling didn't last very long. There was something about that room that never felt quite right. I couldn't explain it back then, and even now it's hard to put into words. The part that bothered me the most was the storage units built directly into the wall. They weren't closets exactly, just these wooden compartments with doors that blended into the wall itself. They looked old, older than the rest of the house, and every time I looked at them, I felt uneasy. It wasn't just that they looked strange. It was the feeling they gave me, like something about them didn't belong, or like they were hiding more than just empty space behind them. During the day, I could ignore it. Sunlight came through the windows, and everything felt normal enough. But at night, it was completely different. Every single night, the moment the lights went out, that uneasy feeling would come back stronger. At first, I thought it was just me being a kid who was scared of the dark, especially in a new and bigger room. See, that seemed like a reasonable explanation, and I tried to convince myself that was all it was. Then I started waking up. It didn't happen just once or twice. It became a pattern. Almost every night I would wake up very early in the morning, long before sunrise. And every time I woke up, I felt the same thing. It was this strong, heavy feeling that someone else was in the room with me. Not just a vague fear, but a clear sense that I wasn't alone. Each time, I would sit up quickly, my heart racing, and reach over to turn on the light. The second the room lit up, there would be nothing there. No movement, no sound, nothing out of place. Just my room, exactly as it should be. Even so, I never turned the light back off after that. I would lie back down and fall asleep again with the light still on, and every morning I would wake up with it shining, like proof that something had scared me enough not to turn it off. This went on for a long time, night after night, the same routine. Wake up, feel watched, turn on the light, see nothing, fall back asleep. Then one night, something changed. My bed was placed right up against one of the walls. That night, I had just turned off the lights and climbed into bed. I was starting to drift off, lying close to the edge, facing away from the wall. As I began to roll over to face it, still half asleep, I saw something that made my entire body jolt awake instantly. Right there, inches from my face, was the face of an old woman. She was smiling. It wasn't a normal smile. There was something wrong about it, something that made it feel unnatural and deeply unsettling. Her face looked aged and pale, and her expression didn't change. She just stared at me, smiling, and then she was gone. She didn't fade slowly or move away. She just disappeared. I jumped out of bed immediately, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I rushed to turn on the light, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing there. The room looked completely normal again. I ran out and woke my parents, trying to explain what I had seen. They listened, but they didn't believe me. They told me it was just a dream, that I must have been half asleep and imagined it. But I knew what I saw. From that night on, I changed how I slept. I made sure my back was always pressed firmly against the wall. I didn't want to risk turning toward it again and seeing that face. That was the first time I actually saw something. Not long after that, we got a cat. I remember being excited about it at first, thinking maybe having her in the room would make me feel less alone at night. The first night we had her, she wandered into my room early in the morning. I was already awake, sitting up in bed with the light on, like I usually was at that hour. As soon as she entered the room, she stopped and looked around, alert, and then she slowly started moving toward the storage units. But she wasn't walking normally. She was creeping, moving carefully, step by step, sniffing the air as she got closer. Her eyes were wide, and her tail had puffed up, standing straight and thick. It was clear she was reacting to something. I just watched her, not sure what to think. She reached one of the storage doors and leaned in closer, still sniffing. And then I heard it. A voice, soft but clear. It whispered, "Hi." The moment the sound reached my ears, the cat reacted instantly. She jumped back and bolted out of the room as fast as she could, like something had scared her badly. I sat there frozen. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The cat had heard it too. The way she reacted made that obvious. That night, I didn't stay in my room. I went downstairs and slept on the couch. I didn't care if I got in trouble. I just didn't want to be in that room anymore. The next day, my parents found out and told me I had to sleep in my room again. They insisted it was all in my head, just my imagination getting carried away at night. I didn't argue much. I didn't think they would believe me anyway. So I went back to sleeping in that room. The next major experience happened not long after. It started the same way as the others. I woke up early in the morning, the room still dark. But this time, the air felt different. It was colder than usual, and that same feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, trying to focus, and then I saw him. Standing in the middle of my room, near the storage units, was a man. He didn't look solid. He looked almost transparent, with a faint glow around him, like a soft blue light. I could see his shape clearly, but there was something unreal about him. He was heavy-set, wearing thick, black-rimmed glasses. He had on camo pants, a camo jacket, and a hat, or with a plain white T-shirt underneath. One of his hands was pressed against his stomach. He looked at me. Then he looked down at his stomach and moved his hand and jacket slightly, revealing something underneath. There was a wound. I could see blood. Then he looked back up at me, making direct eye contact again. His expression wasn't angry or threatening. If anything, he looked confused, like he didn't understand what was happening. That made it even worse. I didn't stay to see anything else. I grabbed my blankets and ran out of the room as fast as I could. Again, I slept on the couch that night. And again, my parents told me the same thing the next morning, that it wasn't real, that it was just a dream. After that, I didn't have a choice. I had to keep sleeping in that room. The encounters didn't stop, but they changed. Nothing after that was as clear or as detailed as the man, but I would still wake up and catch glimpses of things. One morning, I saw what looked like an old woman wearing a purple gown, almost like a ballroom dress. She moved quickly, rushing out from my closet area, but before she could go far, she disappeared into the storage unit, like it was some kind of doorway. Another time, I woke up and saw a young boy standing near the same area. He wore overalls and just stood there quietly. He didn't move or react. He didn't seem threatening at all, almost like he didn't even know I was there. I remember looking at him for a moment, then pulling the covers over my head and going back to sleep. It was strange, but I didn't feel scared of him the same way I had felt with the others. Even so, I never got used to it. That feeling in the room never went away. It became something I learned to live with, something I tried to ignore. We stayed in that house until I was 12. The day we moved out, I didn't feel sad about leaving that room behind. If anything, I felt relieved. And after we left, everything stopped. I never experienced anything like that again. No voices, no figures, no feeling of being watched in the middle of the night. My parents still joke about it sometimes, saying it was just my imagination as a kid, that I made it all up or had very vivid dreams, but I know what I experienced. Even now, I don't fully know what to believe when it comes to things like ghosts or anything supernatural. I'm still skeptical, but those memories never went away, and I've never found a real explanation for any of it. In my final year at university, I was living in an old Victorian-style house with a couple of guys who weren't students. It was one of those tall, slightly worn places that had clearly been around for a long time. The layout was a bit unusual, but after a while, you got used to it. My room was upstairs, right at the top of the stairs, one of 3 bedrooms on the second floor. Downstairs, the house was spread out in a long line. At the very front was one of my housemates' rooms, right next to the front door. His room shared a wall with the living room. From there, the house continued further back into a storage area we all used, then a small bathroom, a back door, and finally the kitchen at the very end, which looked out over the garden. The guy who lived in the front room, Ross, worked for the rail service. His schedule was all over the place. Some weeks he'd be working late shifts, and other times he'd be on overnight duty. When he was on those night rotations, he would usually get home somewhere between 2 and 5 in the morning. At that time in my life, my own schedule was just as strange, but for very different reasons. I was the kind of student who would leave everything until the last minute, then stay up all night trying to finish it. It wasn't unusual for me to still be awake at 3 or 4 in the morning, working on something and snacking to keep myself going. Because of that, I was used to hearing Ross come home at odd hours. I could usually recognize the sound of him coming in, the door opening, the quiet movement as he settled in. Sometimes, if I needed a break, I'd go downstairs and sit with him for a bit, have a smoke, and talk before heading back up to keep working. One night, I was up late editing a project I had put off for way too long. I already knew it was going to take me at least another day or two to finish, so I had settled in for a long night. At some point, around 3 in the morning, I heard noise coming from downstairs. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was Ross getting home from work. That was normal. So I paused what I was doing and started looking around for my cigarettes, thinking I might go down and take a break with him. But something felt off almost immediately. Ross was always quiet when he came in, especially at that hour. He didn't want to wake anyone up, but this time there was a lot of noise. Loud, heavy noise. It sounded like banging, like something being moved or knocked into. I stopped what I was doing and listened more carefully. The noise didn't stop. It wasn't just 1 or 2 sounds. It kept going. Repeated banging, like someone shifting furniture or hitting something against the walls. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe Ross wasn't working that night. Maybe he had gone out drinking and come back late, a bit drunk and clumsy. That seemed like a possible explanation, even if it didn't fully fit. But then it kept going. The longer it continued, the less it sounded like someone just moving around. It started to feel wrong, too loud, too constant. I remember sitting there completely still, listening while my mind started running through possibilities. And the one that stuck was the worst one. What if someone had broken in? That thought hit me hard. I looked around my desk, not really sure what I was doing, and grabbed the knife I'd been using earlier to cut cheese. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, it felt like the only thing I had. I stood by my bedroom door, holding that knife, trying to decide what to do. I had no idea how to actually defend myself with it. The only thing I'd ever used it for was cutting food. Still, it made me feel slightly less helpless. The noise downstairs kept going. I remember thinking to myself that I'd give it a little more time. Maybe it would stop. Maybe I'd hear Ross's voice or something that would make sense of it. I told myself, just wait 30 seconds, and if it doesn't stop, go check. 30 seconds passed. The banging didn't stop, so I opened my door and stepped out onto the staircase. I moved slowly, very slowly. The stairs led straight down toward the front door, and from there you could see into a small reception area that connected to the living room. The door to that room was always slightly open, just enough to peek through. As I made my way down, I tried to stay as quiet as possible, even though the house itself made that difficult. Our old wood creaked under every step, and the sound felt louder than usual in the silence between the bangs. When I reached the bottom, I paused and looked through the gap in the door. From that angle, I could see part of the living room and a bit of the storage area beyond it. Everything looked still. No movement, no shadows shifting, nothing that suggested someone was actually there. At some point during all of this, I realized something else. The banging had stopped, completely. Or the silence that followed felt just as heavy as the noise had been. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to go straight back upstairs and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But another part of me felt like I had already come this far. So I reached out, pushed the living room door open, and quickly turned on the light. Nothing. The room was empty. For a second, I almost expected to see Ross standing there, maybe laughing or surprised. But there was no one. Just the same furniture, the same stillness. I stepped inside and started walking through the living room toward the storage area. I wanted to check the rest of the house, to make sure there wasn't someone hiding somewhere. I was about halfway across the room when it happened. Something brushed past me. It wasn't a light touch. It felt solid, like when you accidentally bump into someone's shoulder in a crowded place. There was a clear sense of something moving past me, or close enough to make contact. I froze instantly. Every part of me went completely still. My heart was pounding, and for a moment I couldn't even think. I just stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. There was nothing there. No one in front of me, no one behind me. Just empty space. I stayed like that for what felt like a long time, just staring ahead toward the kitchen, trying to calm myself down enough to move again. Eventually, I forced myself to keep going. I turned on the rest of the lights, one by one, checking every part of the downstairs, the storage area, the bathroom, the kitchen. I checked the back door carefully. Everything was locked. No signs of forced entry, no open windows, nothing disturbed. There was no explanation. I went back upstairs, still shaken, opened my window, and sat there smoking for a while, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I gave up trying to make sense of it and went to bed. The next day, I told my housemates, expecting them to laugh it off or tell me I had imagined it, but that's not what happened. Instead, they looked at each other in a way that made it clear this wasn't new to them. It turned out that strange noises from downstairs had been happening for a while. They had heard things too. Banging, movement, sounds that didn't make sense. They just chose to ignore it. They stayed in their rooms and didn't go down there at night. Then something else clicked into place. Ross's room was the cheapest in the house, and it wasn't just because of the location. He worked night shifts, not just for his job, but also because it kept him away from the house during those hours. About a month after that night, something else happened that made things even harder to ignore. A large piece of decorative plaster, a ceiling boss, fell from the ceiling in Ross's room and landed directly on his bed. If he had been there, it could have seriously hurt him, but he wasn't. And he was at work. I stayed in that house for the last couple of months of the school year, but after that, I left and never looked back. To this day, I still can't explain what I felt brush past me in that living room, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It was late at night, around 1:24 a.m., when this happened. I remember the exact time because right after everything, I grabbed my phone and texted my mom. I didn't even know how to explain what I had just experienced. All I could think to say was that I had seen something in my room, something that felt real, something that had actually touched me. Even now, trying to put it into words feels difficult because it didn't feel like a dream, and it didn't feel like something my mind just made up. And I'd been asleep before it started. At first, everything seemed normal. Just another night, just another dream. But then the dream itself became strange, more vivid than anything I had experienced before. It wasn't random or blurry like most dreams. It felt structured, almost like I was actually there, moving through it. In the dream, I was in a dark, unsettling place that felt like a mix between a town and something much older, something almost ancient. There were dim lights everywhere, mostly coming from candles. The air looked thick, almost foggy, like smoke hanging low to the ground. I remember seeing figures moving around. Witches, or at least something that looked like them. They were gathered in groups, performing what felt like rituals, standing in circles, whispering or chanting in ways I couldn't fully understand. My middle brother Matthew was there too. That part felt normal at first, like maybe we were just in the same place for some reason. But the situation wasn't normal at all. We were running, both of us, moving through this strange town as if we were trying to find something. I remember thinking we had lost our bikes, and for some reason that felt incredibly important. We were searching everywhere, calling out, splitting up, trying to find where they had gone. At one point, I thought I saw him. I remember the moment clearly. I spotted someone who looked like Matthew, standing not too far away. I felt relieved, like I had finally found him in all that chaos. But as I got closer, something felt off. The closer I moved, the more wrong it became. The shape was there, the outline of a person, but the details didn't match. The face wasn't right. It looked twisted, unnatural, like it was trying to be human, but couldn't quite get it right. Before I could fully process that, everything shifted again. Suddenly, I was in a car, driving through what looked like a run-down part of the same place. The buildings were broken, dark, and abandoned-looking. There was this constant feeling that I wasn't safe, like something was watching me, waiting. And then they appeared. At first, it was just a few figures stepping out into the road, but then more came, and more. Within seconds, there were hundreds of them surrounding the car. They didn't look normal. Their bodies were wrong, their movements unnatural. They closed in quickly, blocking the road, forcing the car to stop. I remember the exact feeling when the car stalled, that sudden realization that I wasn't going anywhere. They started hitting the car, clawing at it, their hands scraping against the windows. The sound was overwhelming, like something between scratching metal and nails on glass. Then the windows started to crack, then shatter. Hands reached in, grabbing at me, pulling at my arms, my clothes. I could hear them, not clearly, but enough to understand one thing. They were there to kill me. That's when everything snapped. I woke up, but I wasn't free. The moment I opened my eyes, I realized I couldn't move. My body felt completely locked in place, like something was physically holding me down. And then I saw them. There were two figures on top of me. I couldn't see their faces clearly, which somehow made it worse, but I could see their forms. They had arms, legs, and bodies, but they didn't look solid. Their skin, or whatever it was, looked thin and wispy, to almost like smoke shaped into a human form. There was something patterned about them too, like the texture of dress socks with faint designs running through them, shifting and moving in a way that didn't make sense. They were pressing down on me, holding me in place. I could feel the weight. I could feel the pressure on my body. I tried to move, to fight back, to even just turn my head, but I couldn't do anything. For a few seconds, maybe longer, I was completely stuck there, fully awake, fully aware, and completely helpless. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they let go. They didn't run. They didn't jump away. They just pulled back and faded. Like smoke being blown away, their forms broke apart and disappeared into the air. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. As I lay there, trying to move again, trying to understand what had just happened, I started to notice things around my room. On the walls, in the air, everywhere I looked, there were markings. It looked like writing, but I couldn't understand it. Symbols, shapes, patterns that didn't make sense, appearing all over the place. And mixed in with that, there were what looked like masks. Not physical objects, but images, almost like impressions floating in the air. Faces that weren't really faces, just shapes suggesting something watching. Then, just like the figures, they all began to fade. One by one, everything disappeared, dissolving into nothing until the room looked normal again. That's when I finally moved. I shot out of bed, my heart racing so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I didn't stop to think, didn't look back, just ran straight out of the room. I needed to get out, needed to be somewhere that didn't feel like that space anymore. I ended up outside, standing on the smoke deck, trying to catch my breath. The night air hit me, cool and real, and for a moment I just stood there shaking, trying to calm down. But even then, something didn't feel right. I could still feel it. On my ankle, exactly where one of them had been holding me, there was a lingering sensation. It felt like pressure, like fingers still wrapped around it. Not painful, but unmistakably there. That was the part that scared me the most, because dreams don't leave that behind. Even now, I don't know how to explain what happened that night. Maybe it was some kind of sleep paralysis mixed with an intense dream. Maybe my mind created something so vivid that it crossed into reality, but it didn't feel like just a dream. It felt like something was actually there. When I think back on it, what bothers me the most isn't just the sound itself, but the way it slowly became a part of my life while everyone around me dismissed it like it was nothing. It's not even something that happened once and went away. It's still happening, and that's what makes it worse. When I was a kid, my bed was placed right next to the heater in my room. The head side of my bed was almost touching it. Because of that, I got used to hearing all kinds of small noises at night, and there were gurgling sounds sometimes, like when air gets trapped inside the heating system. It wasn't pleasant, but it was normal enough that I never really questioned it. I would hear it, recognize it, and then go back to sleep. But every now and then, there was another sound. It was different from anything the heater made. It wasn't random or messy. It was steady, controlled, and very specific. It sounded like someone dragging their fingernails slowly across a rough wooden surface. Not once, or not twice, but 4 times in a row, evenly spaced. Scratch, 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 scratch. There was something unnatural about how consistent it was. No variation, no hesitation, no change in rhythm. It didn't sound like something alive moving around. It didn't sound like an animal searching or chewing or scratching randomly. It sounded almost deliberate. Still, I was a kid, and I didn't want to scare myself, so I convinced myself it was just another heater noise. Even though deep down, it didn't really match. The heater made messy, uneven sounds. This was clean, almost patterned. It didn't happen all the time either. Sometimes days or even weeks would pass without anything. Then, suddenly, I would hear it again, clear as ever, always the same 4 scratches, always that same strange texture to the sound. If I had to compare it, the closest thing I can think of is the chirping sound a grasshopper makes, that repeating pattern. But even that isn't quite right. This was rougher, a heavier, like something harder dragging across wood instead of a light insect sound. Over time, I stopped thinking about it too much. It became one of those small, unexplained things you just accept because you don't have a better answer. Life moved on. Then, a couple of years ago, things changed. I moved 1 floor downstairs into a different bedroom. It was directly under my old room. Completely different setup, different walls, different position in the house. I didn't think about the old sounds at all when I moved. As far as I was concerned, that was just something tied to the old heater and that room. For a while, everything was quiet. Normal, nothing strange. Then one day, I heard it again. That same sound. Scratch, 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 scratch. At first I froze. I remember sitting at my desk, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But then it came again just as clear. And this time, it wasn't near a heater. It sounded like it was coming from the left side of my desk. I turned and looked, but there was nothing there. just a blank wall. My desk was pushed right up against it. No gaps, no openings, nothing that could explain a sound like that. I tried to ignore it, but over the next few days, it kept happening. And what made it worse was that it didn't stay in one place. Sometimes it would come from the left side. Other times, it would sound like it was coming from the right. And then there were moments where it felt like it was above me, near the windowsill. One night, I woke up suddenly because of it. The sound was so clear and so close that it instantly pulled me out of sleep. My heart started racing as I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the window. Nothing. I checked the entire sill carefully. No insects, no marks, no movement. It was completely empty. I even checked the corners, the edges, anywhere something small could hide. There was nothing, or not even the smallest sign that anything had ever been there. That's when it really started to get to me, because if it had been insects, I would have seen something by now. There would be some kind of evidence, tiny shells, droppings, movement, anything, but there was absolutely nothing. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It kept happening. The sound would appear, repeat itself exactly the same way, and then stop. Sometimes it would come back minutes later, sometimes hours, sometimes not until the next day. I started paying more attention to it, trying to understand it. It was always just one source, never multiple sounds at once, just one, moving around. That somehow made it worse in a strange way. It felt more focused, more present. I also noticed how clear it was. This wasn't a faint background noise. It was sharp and distinct. There was no confusion about what I was hearing. It wasn't like trying to make sense of random creaks or distant sounds. This was right there. And yet, no one else seemed to experience it. When I tried to explain it to people, they brushed it off. Some said it was probably insects. Others laughed it off like I was overreacting. A few didn't even take it seriously enough to respond properly. That part honestly made it worse than the sound itself, because when something strange happens and you can talk about it with someone who understands, it becomes easier to deal with. But when people dismiss you, it makes you question yourself while the experience is still continuing. I even went out of my way to research it. I spent hours listening to recordings of different insects online: crickets, grasshoppers, termites, ants, wasps, mice, anything that could possibly make a similar sound. None of them matched. Some came close, but not close enough. It's like comparing two shades of the same color. They might look similar at first, but when you really look at them, you can tell they're different. That's exactly how it felt. The closest was still that grasshopper-like rhythm, but the texture was wrong, too smooth, too light. What I hear is rougher, heavier, more solid. I also started thinking about whether something could actually live in my room, but that didn't make sense either. I don't keep food there. There's no water source except maybe a bit of moisture on the window when it's cold. There's nothing for anything to survive on, and if something had been there for this long, there would be clear signs, but there aren't. No droppings, no damage, no remains, nothing. That's the part that keeps bothering me, not just the sound, but the complete lack of evidence. It's like something is there when the sound happens, and then completely gone the next second. Over time, I've gotten used to it in a way, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still creep me out. Every time I hear it, there's still that moment where everything in me goes still, just listening, trying to figure out where it's coming from this time, and every time it's the same pattern: scratch, 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 then silence. I still don't have an answer, and maybe that's the hardest part. Not knowing what it is, not being able to prove anything, and having it continue like this without any clear reason. Sometimes I think I've gotten close to figuring it out, and then it happens again in a different spot, and I'm back to the beginning. At this point, I don't even know what explanation I'd prefer. A normal one that I just haven't figured out yet, or something stranger that at least explains why none of this makes sense. All I know is that it's real, it's consistent, and it hasn't stopped. I grew up in a lake house that had a really strange history, and even though parts of it were newer additions, the older sections gave off this heavy, unsettling energy. The original part had cranked windows, no air conditioning, which in Florida was brutal, and creaky floors that seemed to groan with every step. Over the years, my dad had fixed it up and expanded it. Someone added a second half to the house, and later another owner added a second story. There was an attic over the first half and a second floor over the newer section. When we moved in, it was in shambles, but my dad spent years making it livable and even beautiful. Still, despite all the renovations, the house always had a way of feeling off. The first truly creepy moment happened the night before Easter. I was 10, my older sister 13, and we were sharing a bed in the new section of the house. We'd been chatting, excited about the holiday. The room was large and connected to the oldest part of the house. I was facing the door to what used to be the old master bedroom. Everything seemed normal until I saw something move across the floor. There was just enough moonlight filtering in to give me a glimpse, but I couldn't make out what it was. It looked like layers of sheer fabric floating and sliding over the floor, some parts dark, some parts almost invisible. It moved fluidly, like water, straight toward the bed. Before I could say anything, it shot up toward the ceiling next to our bed. My sister saw my terrified expression and turned to look. She saw it too. There was no clear shape, but it had eyes, greenish and glowing, like some kind of unearthly light. It hovered for a moment, almost liquid in its movement. Then it just fell to the floor like a lead weight and disappeared. My sister screamed, and our parents rushed in, but when they looked, there was nothing. After that night, we never slept in that bedroom again. We moved to the newest part of the house, the second floor addition, where there was a huge open room with a bathroom and tall ceilings. The second strange thing happened in that new upstairs room. The ceilings were so tall that the wall separating the bathroom from the bedroom didn't reach all the way up. There was a large gap, enough that you could toss a ball over it. That gap meant that any sound from the bathroom carried easily into our room. So almost every night, my sister and I would hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, walking across the bathroom floor. It was unmistakably the sound of someone in boots, not light scuffling or a pet. We opened the bathroom door a couple of times, but when we did, the footsteps would stop immediately, only to start again later. There was no pattern. It was unnerving, like someone invisible was pacing back and forth just to let us know we weren't alone. The third experience still took place upstairs, or in the same large room. To get to the living room from our section, you had to go downstairs, through the closed stairway, the entryway, the kitchen, a hallway with a bathroom, and finally into the living room. Night after night, I would hear noises coming from the living room, voices talking, a television turning on, glasses clinking, even the faint shuffle of movement. At first I tried to ignore it, but the sounds were so clear that I eventually got fed up. I went downstairs to confront my parents, thinking they were playing a prank or watching TV loudly. But every time I approached, The noises stopped. The lights were off, everything was silent, and no one was there. I swear I could hear it getting louder as I walked closer, then vanish entirely when I reached the living room. It happened so many times that I eventually stopped going downstairs at night. I have to admit, I'm a Christian, and I don't believe in ghosts in the sense of trapped spirits wandering after death. I do believe in spirits and some things beyond the ordinary, but the events in that house were difficult to explain rationally. My uncle once told me that someone had killed themselves in that house while helping with renovations. I don't know if he was joking or trying to scare us, but that detail always made me uneasy. Years later, a friend of a friend visited. She claimed to have abilities related to summoning spirits, though I didn't know her well. Without knowing anything about the house, she pointed to the old section near the bathroom and said she thought there was a doorway there. That freaked me out because that bathroom door was always mysteriously open, no matter how many times we closed it. That bathroom was just a couple of feet from the living room, which might explain why the upstairs room and the living room seemed connected by something invisible. Looking back, the house had this constant energy that felt alive in a way that was both fascinating and terrifying. The floating fabric figure, the footsteps in the bathroom, the inexplicable noises in the living room. They weren't threats, but they were definitely a presence, always watching. Even though I don't believe in traditional ghosts, I can't explain what I experienced in that house. It left a mark on me. I remember being a kid lying in bed, listening to the house breathe and shift around me, knowing that whatever it was aware of us. It was a mix of awe and fear, a feeling that has stayed with me for years, long after we left that lake house behind. Even now, I can picture those glowing green eyes, the way the figure moved like water across the floor, the heavy footsteps echoing at night, and the phantom sounds from the living room. There's no rational explanation I've been able to come up with, and every time I recall those nights, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That house was beautiful, sprawling, and full of family memories, but it was also alive in a way that no human could control or understand. Living there as a kid, seeing and hearing all of that, it made me feel both very small and very aware of something just beyond comprehension. You've just heard hours of real experiences. Doppelgangers in the kitchen, footsteps in empty rooms, whispers from inside the walls. Which single moment is going to stay with you when you turn off the lights tonight? And if something like this had happened to you, would you tell anyone? Share your story in the comments, and if you want more true horror, you can like the video and subscribe.